Hello again everybody, and welcome to the next in the series of RIABU interviews. And today we have an expert voice on receivables for you from Romania via Russia. And before I introduce you to our wonderful guest, here's a couple of thoughts for today. We just heard, didn't we, that because of inflation in the US, which is the highest it's been for 30 years, we can expect the Fed to significantly increase interest rates. They're saying in the middle of next year, but it's very likely to be before that in our estimation. What does that mean? It means that if you are a company that's had to borrow money from either a bank or some other intermediary in order to make up, let's say, for a lack of working capital or for the fact that your customers are paying you late, maybe you're going to be facing significantly higher interest payments. Wouldn't it therefore make sense to ensure that you get paid on time? And we have written Let the Cash Flow precisely in order to provide you with a template for getting paid on time by your customer every time. So without further ado, let's meet Octavian Popa. Welcome. You're the Finance Executive Director Asia Pacific for a leading women's health company, is that right?
Yeah, thank you very much for the invitation, Simon. Always a pleasure to be around you, and especially a special pleasure, to talk about your book.
Well, this is a social enterprise. I mean, the book was written in order to help companies, especially SMEs, to get paid on time, because we're looking at a world where big companies are systematically delaying payments to smaller companies. So if you're a small company, what can you do, or even a medium-sized company, to get paid on time? You've agreed to talk to us about two aspects of the virtuous revenue cycle, 8 things that you can do to get paid on time. You have agreed to talk about prompt discrepancy resolution, that's dealing with the things that occur when you have a transactional issue, and systematic root cause elimination. But before we do that, because we've never had someone with your storied background in the studio before, tell us a little bit about the receivable situation in Bucharest, Romania, where you come from, and then perhaps in Russia, where you subsequently worked.
To be honest with you, accounts receivable is a subject that is very dear to me, because I was facing it from the moment I was hired for the first time. Yeah? So,
and that was in Bucharest?
In Bucharest, yes, 1999, back in 1999. So my first task was actually to recover the money from the customers, and with the knowledge that I had in that moment, yes, intuitively start calling, start asking questions and so on. So I found out reading your book a lot of these aspects, that, and even more than this. So it's great to have a book that is basically systematizing everything that a finance professional needs to do in order, to get accounts receivable paid.
Well, I doubt if everything is in there, but we're doing our very best. And one of the reasons we're doing these interviews is because we're asking people like you who've got real experience in countries that I imagine are pretty difficult. I mean, I imagine that, for example, in Romania and possibly in Russia as well, DSOs were quite long.
Yes, indeed. I was facing situation close to 1 year in almost
1 year of DSO.
Both in the country, both of the countries. Yes, and this is coming from many issues, but mainly it's coming from the way how the government makes its payment. So if the government doesn't have money to pay in time, basically this is has a domino effect in the economy, and everybody is delaying payments. But also, yes, that's maybe half of the problem. The other half of the problem is actually that nobody has a really professional, or few companies has a really even corporation don't have a professional way of looking at accounts receivable. Yes, a systematic way how to approach accounts receivable in order to be paid in time or with very small delays.
And our experience at RIABU, and it's a key fact that we've built on in the book, is that much of the time, 80% of the time that you do experience late payment is because of something that you could or should have done differently, which might mean that you've made a mistake on the invoice, that you haven't defined the terms of trade properly, or some other communication or buy-in issue. So you very kindly agreed to talk about this, which is discrepancy resolution. So discrepancy is any unmet customer expectation, any pretext that the customer can use to hang on to his money is a discrepancy.
And indeed, that's one of the main reasons for delays in payment. Yes, in my experience, I noticed that could be everything. Yes, from missing a letter from the bank name, finishing with is not the right format, because in many of the countries the invoices are really regulated about the format. So in all time, if you wanted to have an electronic invoice issued, many times you will say, oh, this line is more right than it should be, or it's more left. So in this context, yes, companies are doing sometimes the necessary steps to prevent first. Yes, they said, okay, dear customer, this is what we want to invoice you. Do you agree with the products? Do you agree with the services? Usually, yes, companies said, yes, I agree with them, this is a price, it's according with the contract. Then the interesting part comes. Yes, you issue the invoice, and the invoice start to be checked from multiple perspectives. Does it has all contractual element, PO number, amount, services and products? Does it have the right VAT calculations, the right fiscal wording? Yes, many of the countries have a special fiscal wording how to word. Does all elements of bank address details and so on are there? And many times, yes, especially if the master data of the companies are not well maintained, especially for small and medium companies that might not pay the full attention of it, that may drive delays.
And when you've got something on the invoice that shouldn't be there, or something that's wrong, that's a discrepancy. It falls under the category of something that the customer is not going to like, and they're not going to accept, and they're not going to pay you until you fix
exactly. it. And actually, you might be lucky that the customer is coming back to you and say, there is an error on your invoice, or you might be unlucky. You said that your invoice.
Why would they tell you? I mean, maybe the customer, who's a perfectly nice person, is quite happy to hang on to his money a bit longer.
Yeah, or might be that he's overlooking on it. Yes, because he's also busy on other problem. And
I think that's a very generous way of looking at it.
And it's your problem to make sure that everything is aligned. So that's why it's very important. You issue the invoice, you leave 1-2 days for checking, and then you call or you send a message. Hey, is the invoice okay? You may email to your stakeholders there and
Brilliant.
so on.
Brilliant. And in a minute, we're going to come on and talk about systematic root cause elimination, because if you keep making the same mistakes over and over again, you're always going to be paid late. So the issue is, how do you stop making mistakes?
Yeah.
Before we come to that, we've talked about Romania and Russia. When you came to Singapore, how many countries do you deal with?
Well, I'm dealing, I think there are 18 markets, yes. If you
they're all Asian Pacific markets?
All Asia Pacific, Australia, New Zealand and Japan markets.
So they vary enormously in terms of the level of discipline around payment, I imagine.
Yeah, it's there are. I think there are different from. You see a different level of accounts receivable culture from market to market. What I think that our company, being a corporation, yes, using shared business services, has certain processes that enable paying in time, but I may not say the same thing for the partners that we are working on.
Okay.
So due to this fact, it's important, and it was always important, how to create this culture of paying in time for your customers.
So it's not just, I mean, that's a very interesting insight, isn't it? It's something maybe we should write about in our revised edition of the book coming out next year, which is, you can nail all these issues within your own company, but to the extent that you're depending on third-party partners to go to market, they have to have the same level of professionalism and discipline, or you're going to have these issues.
And you will have an unbalance in your accounts payable versus accounts receivable.
Okay.
Yes, and because you will face suddenly a cash flow issue.
So you've paid for it and they haven't paid you.
Yeah, so that requires a lot of discipline in both sides in order, to make this mechanism beautiful. Horologium economy mechanism work
we can
smoothly.
make one of those what they called models of the universe.
Yeah.
Interesting. Well, we talked about prompt discrepancy resolution. So that is rapidly understanding where a mistake has been made, which is preventing the customer from paying in. The only way to do that is to make sure that you contact the customer early in the process, keep a record of what the issue is, and ensure that you get someone in your organization to resolve it.
Exactly, and usually the issue is in master data. Yes, it might come in the master data. It might come in the way how the invoice is worded in terms of services. And now, of course, there are a lot of tools that are helping, reading and matching and bringing, wording from contract to be exactly matching on the invoice. And
they're
so
helping, except that a machine will say no. If it was a person, you could phone them up and say, just change that to...
Exactly.
The machine is binary, right?
But in the same time, what is good with a machine that gives you a fast feedback. Yeah, the machine will send an email back to you and will say, your invoice should be reissued.
So let's talk about, so a discrepancy, we prefer to define, what we call it in the book is any unmet customer expectation. The reason we use that terminology is sometimes they come up with things that you didn't know they wanted. And that's why one of the things that we say is you need, when you onboard the customer, to have a clear credit policy. And some of your colleagues have talked about this in earlier interviews. And part of that is to ensure that you've got all that master data information from the customer. So you ask all the right questions before you actually do business with them. What do they want to see on the invoice? What reference points do they need to do? What do they need? A proof of delivery? Do they need a purchase order? All these sort of things. Right?
You need to have the right validation point for the master data. First, you need to ensure that the data are really from your customer. Yeah, because it might be some scam, and I think in our world today we see a lot of scams.
So there's a KYC risk.
Yes, people sending fake invoices, or faking the bank
Surely
account.
People don't do that in Singapore, do they?
I didn't face, to be honest,
Okay.
in Singapore, but I think there are some, especially in the emerging markets, there might be some habits like this. I receive calls, for example, I'm the CEO of your company. Can you pay me 1 million fastly because I want to make an acquisition? So I receive call like this.
Wow, okay. So but that's not a brilliant fraud though, is it? I mean...
to be honest, I heard that there were some companies that they really paid,
Goodness gracious me.
In Europe.
So discrepancies occur, any unmet expectation. If you want to be paid on time, you have to deal with the discrepancy before the invoice is due or very soon after it's due. Otherwise, you're not going to get paid.
Indeed. And here what is important, I think you need to ensure that your invoice is going to a large audience, to all stakeholders that you have in that company. Either we are talking about commercial, either we are talking about finance, either we are talking about procurement. The invoice should go to everybody and should go to the accountant that will push the approval payment button.
And by the same token, when you set up the relationship with that customer in your master data file, you need to make sure that the different requirements of those different people are already met and understood.
Exactly.
If not, you might go through this painful process over the first 6 months or 9 months where you're slowly learning the things that you should have known to begin with. And one of the things we write about in the book, and it's very important, is getting that master data information early on and resisting the temptation to rush into a transaction until you have the information you need to get paid, right?
Exactly, and from the right people, validated by official people from that particular company. So it should be very official, and you need on one side internally to have a validation process. So it's not enough that somebody to fill in the data of that company. It will be important that somebody to check that the data.
So go back to the customer and make sure they confirm it. I mean, what we argue in the book, and I'm interested in your view on this, is that basic data about who to contact and what needs to be in the invoice should be in your credit policy, which the customer sees and signs, so that in essence they commit to the fact that you have the information that you need to get paid.
Yeah, usually a company has a stakeholders. A stakeholder is orders those goods and services, and that's probably the main contact for it. But in the same time, there is a procurement process.
And there may be a lady in the back office who actually pays the invoice.
Yes, it's an accountant, and might be that the invoice is paid by an accountant in that office or by an accountant in Genpact or in some shared business service across the world.
There's a lovely anecdote in here from one of our 3 case study references, and they're all very compelling, about how a man who had started up with his partners a brand new business, and it was relatively small, was selling like crazy but had no money in the bank because his customers weren't paying him, and the only way he could get paid was to go on an aeroplane, to your point, to the Philippines, find the lady at the customer who's responsible for paying invoices, and he writes about, and it's a very good story, how he takes her for lunch. And no one's ever taken her for lunch before. So off they go for lunch. And guess what happens after that? The invoice gets paid on time every month, right? So understanding the people at your customer site who are influential in making that decision to pay the invoice, right?
It's very critical. It's very important.
Because if they like you, they'll tell you when there's a mistake rather than sitting on their hands, and they'll help you rectify it. Okay, so let's talk about root cause elimination. So taking a step back, one of the things we write about in the book is Mr. Pareto. Pareto was the Italian economist who said that 80% of the value is in 20% of the transactions. And if you look at receivables, it's perfectly true that 80% of the money you're owed comes from 20% of your customers. But if you look at discrepancies and you list all the different discrepancy types, you'll find that 80% of the value that's held up by mistakes lies in only 20% of the types. So if you have 15 different reasons why invoices go wrong, 3 or 4 of those reasons will be holding up 80% of the invoices. So you can use that to figure out what you're doing wrong on a continuous basis. And can you then use that to fix the problem internally, make sure it doesn't happen again?
I will be a little bit more. I will debate the subject even larger a little bit. Yes. So I think first you need to make sure that you have the right customers. How can you ensure that the customers that you have are customers with good payment behaviors? Yes, with a track and proven record will be very nice. If they are not, that doesn't mean that you don't have to make deals with them, but means
maybe
that
it's a cash deal.
You need to pay a special attention for them, because talking about this 20% that are creating problem, actually 80% are not creating problems. Yes, 80% are good, might be good customers. They are the 20% that are creating problem, and usually, in my experience, I'm focusing on this 20%. Why they are creating? Are they creating problems because they have a cash flow issue? Are they creating problems because
they just want to be difficult?
Because they want to be difficult and use your money? Are they creating problem because it's a problem coming from yourself that you do not? You're not aligned with their process of payments. Yes. So in this context, once you identify the problems, there are problems that are in your power, like, okay, I'm not aligned with your payment process. I need to be better in issuing the invoice, in communicating with you, and keeping the relationship. Yes. And that's for me to fix. But if you don't pay because you don't have money, yes, you have cash flow problems, or you don't, this is an unusual habit for you, to use your supplier's money, then here, so if you have money and use your supplier money, then you need to create a leverage with this. Yes, okay, this is a mutual relationship. You need me, I need you. How can we both contribute to this relationship? Yes,
and this book is all about relationships. It's about making the right relationship with the right customer, because human beings, by and large, prefer to be honest. If you can create good relationships with good, honest customers and make sure you know enough at the beginning of the relationship to assess their creditworthiness and to be able to get paid on time, you're in good shape. The other really good business advice that we've heard from Octavian is that 80% of your problems lie with 20% of your customers. And I'm addressing specifically those companies who may be listening to this, who've got big receivables problems already, possibly because of COVID or because of whatever reason. If you're faced with a huge pile of invoices and you're struggling to know what order to deal with them, well, then list them in descending order of magnitude and look at the top 20%. And that will be 80% of the value. That's simple mathematical formula, and it will enable you to focus very specifically on how you can have most impact on your receivables in the shortest possible time. Octavian, you've got thousands of things to tell us. Unfortunately, we are slightly running out of time now. So
apologies.
No. There's no need to apologize. This is all absolutely golden, and it's the first time I've ever sat down and listened to an anecdote about receivables that started in Bucharest and then went to Russia and then came to Singapore. This is very interesting. Let me throw this back to you and say, what further advice would you give to anyone that's sitting in your position as finance director across multiple markets in Asia, and you were giving him or her advice on how to ensure that they get paid on time? Is there anything that you'd add?
Yeah, always try to find ways to create leverage with your partners. Yes, either we are talking about suppliers that are real suppliers, either we are talking about customers. So it's always needs to be both part, like in a marriage. Yes, I'm coming with something, because we are talking about long-term marriages usually in our relationship with customers. So try to create leverage to be able, to push the right buttons in the moment when you need it.
Octavian Popa, I very much hope that we'll be able to get you back in the studio at some point in the future to talk in a little bit more detail about this. So there we are, everybody. Lots of lessons to learn. Singapore has the same problems, although maybe to a less greater extent than Romania or Moscow. The principles of getting paid on time. There are 8 key things to bear in mind. Do take a look at the book, and if you're not happy or if you think we've missed something out, tell us about it. And stay in touch with the RIABU interview. Lots more to come.